Hello, and welcome again to the Three Questions podcast. This is Paul Saunders with the Center for the National Interest. I'm really delighted to have with me today Abdulla Al Junaid, who is a very well-known journalist in Bahrain, a columnist and commentator. He headed the analysis and policy department at the National Unity Party in Bahrain, has done a number of other really interesting, impressive things, works in consulting, has graciously written for our publication, The National Interest, a number of times, and I think is a very thoughtful observer of the Persian Gulf region. And given everything that's occurring in the region, I really wanted to reach out to Abdulla to talk today and to give a regional perspective on events there. Thank you so much, Abdulla, for being with me today on Three Questions and sharing your views with our audience.
Pleasure is mine, Paul. Thank you for the invitation.
We're talking here on Thursday, the 19th. We'll put the podcast online on Monday, which I guess is the 23rd of March. But talking here on the 19th, it's hard not to start by asking you about this barrage of Iranian missile and drone strikes on energy targets across the Gulf region, of course, following an Israeli attack on an Iranian South Pars natural gas site, which President Trump has kind of denied knowing about in advance. The first question I have would be, could you tell us a little bit about what has occurred? And also, more importantly, how are people in Bahrain and the wider region, reacting to this escalation?
This development, it's not something that we would describe as, something being welcomed. And at the same time, it's not something new when something like this at this magnitude is forced on the region. And we've seen it since 2003 until today, where sometime Israel will take a decision of escalation against Iran. And Israelis, Iranian, and the whole region pay the price of this for it. But at the present time, the impact, it's beyond psychological or economical. It is a disastrous by all the meaning of the word and magnitudes. We've seen Iran taking shots at economic or energy infrastructures. We've seen Iran targeting, civilian communities and so on. And it's not something that the Iranian don't know what are they targeting. We've seen it happen over the time. And the latest targeting of Israel of that gas facilities on the Iranian mainland, it's definitely not welcome. And we all protested. We all wanted to neutralize energy because it's taking massive beating on both sides. And the Iranian are not targeting just the Israelis, but targeting the whole infrastructure region-wise. And could you imagine if this continues even after the war ends? I mean, the impact of oil and gas, it's going to remain quite high. And I believe we are still recovering from the COVID period. So we hope that this crisis does find a meaningful end where both parties decide on going back to the diplomatic path that was secured through the Omani Channel. But at the present time, and this is the unfortunate reality, I strongly believe that this war is being prosecuted from two different points of view. There's the Israeli war and there is the U.S. The U.S. want to continue degrading Iranian capacity and capability to force them back to a more agreeable sort of negotiating table. While Benjamin Netanyahu, I believe he's strongly prosecuting this war with a regime toppling and regime change in mind. Now, how could those two start, let's say, finding a common ground? But unfortunately, at the present time, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
You brought up there toward the end, the United States and the Trump administration, and obviously the administration kind of cooperating very closely with Israel in the unfolding combat operations on Iran, and certainly also in launching the war at the beginning. President Trump, really during his first year in office, I think it's been obvious that he's invested very heavily a lot of his time and effort in deepening the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia, with the United Arab Emirates, also with Qatar. I would say those three especially, but certainly, reaching out to the Gulf generally as kind of a critical, strategic American partner. How do you feel over the longer term that this war affects how people and governments in the region view the United States and view the kind of deep security, economic, and other ties with America?
Back in 2025, when President Trump decided to intervene in terms of totally neutralizing the nuclear program, especially targeting Fordo, this was definitely has been appreciated here in the region from the prospect of bringing an end to a conflict. So that was the sort of perceived US policies in terms of aiding and containing certain crises, especially with Iran or between Iran and Israel. At the present time, I'm sorry to say that the United States has been sucked into this or suckered into this conflict with a total belief that they could contain a wider sort of escalation. But it is fast proving it is otherwise. How far this going to impact US GCC relation? We've seen Washington taking major steps with regard to finding really an independent policy toward the region out of the prospect of Israel first sort of policy for the first time. And we wanted for that to continue to evolve and for us to engage further the United States on so many aspects, not just economical, but also in a new field of the fourth industrial revolution, AI and industrialization of AI and everything. This now may represent some sort of a new challenge. We will continue to see or view the United States as the main strategic regional partner. That is not going to change. But we would like very much for the US in any future approaches or policies toward this region is to consider, at least consult with its allies in the region and not just purely Israel. Because even when I speak to Israelis, and I promise you, I'm speaking to the right Israelis, and none of them are in favor of this decision, nor they are willing to, risk the future of Israel regional relation just based on Benjamin Netanyahu sort of approach or his securing some sort of personal legacy. Now, for the US, they need to think about the day after this conflict. We had jumped from Gaza the day after to a bigger conflict where the whole region is being targeted by Iran. It's not just a matter of infrastructure. At the present time, we just achieve some sort of a transitional stability of in Syria. And we were working very close with the Iraqis to do something similar. Okay. That is a strategic objectives regionally and internationally. And we want to see the US understanding, them being partnering us in this, but being suckered into a new conflict that we haven't even touched on phase 2 of the Gaza plan. Now, could you imagine the landscape as it is standing? It is very, very messy. We need more diplomacy and less gung-ho, gang-slinger approach to every issue related to the Middle East.
Certainly, some of what you said, I imagine, kind of controversial in the United States, of course, as I'm sure you well appreciate. but I think very helpful for our audience to hear your perspective and perspective of others really across the region about all of that. So my final question, maybe just looking ahead a little bit here over the next few weeks, and honestly, I think it's hard to look more than a few weeks ahead right now because of the pace of events and how rapidly things are evolving. But I think on one hand, you see kind of a number of Americans who might have expected some of the GCC governments to become involved militarily, to retaliate against Iran because of the attacks on their own territory and their own citizens. Those governments have been very restrained so far, although certainly some increasingly tough statements from some, particularly after the latest attacks. So, kind of on one hand, is there a prospect that some of the governments in the region, might decide really to strike at Iran? And if so, what would be the threshold that would trigger that? And kind of conversely, do you see over the course of the next few weeks, any prospect that this could end? That, some people want President Trump kind of to declare victory. Personally, it's not obvious to me that he could declare victory and the other two parties to the conflict would stop fighting. But some certainly hope for that. Some hope that there may be, room for negotiations, although the Iranians don't look too enthusiastic about that right now. Some others kind of believe that the Iranian regime is on the verge of collapsing, and maybe that would end everything. What does all of this look like from your point of view? These kind of two issues, the potential military role of GCC countries on the one hand, and is there an end to all of this anytime soon?
I believe that there's a misunderstanding of what the GCC position stands for. First of all, adopting a defensive position doesn't mean you are not in the fight, because when you defend, actually, you are not just defending the security and the well-being of your own people, but everybody living on those countries. And we're talking about and all over the GCC, talking about something like 29 over 29 million people from all over the world living among us, American, European, and you name it. More than that, being and taking a defensive position, as well as aiding indirectly in saving a lot of ammos, Patriot and the like from being used by the US, could be redeployed somewhere else, probably after this conflict. So this is one part. More than that, what the public opinion is missing is understanding what defensive posturing mean. It's not static. We are not just defending from uh, the land of the GCC countries. We are uh, deploying now our navies, air forces to engage and neutralize those threats. And if those threats do present themselves, or the source of those threats, probably if they present themselves being close within the area of operation of our assets, air or naval, I'm sure that our forces will take the amicable or the right action in terms of neutralizing the source of those threats. So being on the defense or defensive policy in this conflict doesn't mean you're sitting idle. It's not. And what those, people, when they, let's say, wish for us to engage Iran where? On a military side, I believe it will take major coordination, and this is going to be evaluated, and the policy toward that will need to be really taking in mind exactly which sector, which geography in Iran, which of our forces is capable to address those level of threats. It's not that our boys and girls are not capable, but we need exactly, are more coordinated if in the future an agreement is reached by assigning a certain targets or sector when the decision is taken. I promise you, you in the States and the rest of the world are going to be seeing our boys and girls doing exactly what your boys and girls are doing, taking orders and executing those orders perfectly.
And off ramps or an end to any of this? Do you see it ending in the next few weeks, or not see
Well,
a pathway out?
if you recall President Trump early last week when he said, or early this week, sorry, when he said that probably it's not going to end this week. In a way, everybody took it for what it means. So maybe he have, agreed to extend for another week based on Israeli request. Now, this week is almost over. Today is the last day of Ramadan. Tomorrow we'll have Eid. So would Israel, more than the US, decide on end of hostilities? This is one. Can President Trump replicate what George Bush, the son, did? Mission accomplished from one of the aircraft carriers operating here? I don't think President Trump at the present time is in position to declare mission accomplished because it's not. So the administration or the leadership in DC need to define what is mission accomplished is. Is it regime change? Is it pushing insurgency from the sides of Iran borders like Baluchistan, Khuzestan, and Kurdistan to being enabled to take military action or insurgency war supported by the US? Now, if that does happen, and I'll tell you the truth, I believe that is taking place, then this may continue for another 2 to 3 months from now.
Sounds like we will have a lot to talk about in the coming weeks and months. Thank you again, Abdulla Al Junaid, for joining me on the Three Questions podcast from Bahrain and giving, I think, a very informed and informative and interesting perspective from the region. Really appreciate your being with me today.
Pleasure is mine, Paul. Thank you for the invitation.